evening. Herscherik, reincarnated prince. This is chapter 3. And before I start, I want to thank you for, translators online. Wink wink, notch notch. Alright. Chapter 3. Pocket Watch, Earl, and Puppet. 1. Woo! Herscherik let out a muffled voice as he rolled over inside his first class futon. At the end of the terrible banquet, Herscherik returned to his room with his father. Merla, who felt more than regret than he did, comforted him as she bathed him. Then he changed his clothes to pajamas and crawled into his bed. Normally, it would only take him 3 minutes before he drifted off in dreamland, but today he was unable to sleep, and it felt like the journey to dreamland was far. When Herscherik turned over again, the beautiful old silver pocket watch left on the side of the table came into view. It was an object that came tumbling towards his feet by chance when the abused traitor, the Earl of Luxuria, was arrested. At that moment, his line of sight was attracted to it like a magnet, and before he knew it was in his hand. Now, the beautiful old silver pocket watch was giving off a dull shine from the moonlight that entered through the gap of the curtains. Rather than saying that no one is to be blamed, the surrounding people were nothing like that, and because of them being flustered, he carried the thing unnoticed. When his father brought him to his own room, Herscherik crawled out of his futon and picked up the pocket watch. It was one of those type with button open and close it. And when you press it, the lid opens up to reveal a clocked face. He had already shared a sense with his body, but it appeared that day his world was also 24 hours, just like the previous world. There were 12 numbers lined up in the same way. He understood by looking at the position of the needle that it was a little past 10 o'clock at night. Why did father have such sad face when he was told that Earl Luxuria was a traitor? The memory of his father's sad expression was burned in the inside of his mind. As a king, the scene should have been more exposed, angered at his retainer who betrayed him. Father was kind, so he might have felt sadness, but Herscherik had to say. Then his expression was more benefiting to be called disappointment. Besides, the Earl didn't look like a bad person. To Herscherik, the Earl of Luxuria seems to be sincerely troubled at the country. At the same time, it also felt like he was being cornered. Something is wrong. The uneasy that he felt at the place of disturbed Herscherik's sleep. It called forth insecurity in Herscherik's heart and stirred up impatience. He desperately tried to uncover the truth of this unease, reaching deep inside his mind to recall that incident. The document that Earl Luxuria pulled out, father's face of shock. The secret message Marquis Barbarous pulled out. Marquis Barbarous was filled with confidence compared to the Earl of Luxuria, who had a hopeless expression. He tried to recall the details that he didn't notice at the time and repeatedly reproduced the scene in his head. The moment he noticed several reflections, the impatience of herscherik vanished. He unconsciously relaxed his hand, and the pocket watch fell. But he couldn't be bothered to notice. The Marquis' proof and the Earl's count and the Earl's action aren't consistent. The evidence that the Marquis could have certainly, definitely proved, however, could have been a definitive proof. However, the person sending secret message to a foreign country to seek asylum wouldn't report to the king, as if rubbed his nose in the face of danger. If he was herscherik, he would escape right away. That way, rather than rubbing his sins in the face, he would have a higher chance of easily escaping. No thief would purposely turn themselves in to the police while holding into the evidence. When he was reconsidering the minister's actions as well, they were also strange. How could he determine Earl's document to be counterfeit without checking and knowing its contents? Perhaps he knew something beforehand about the document handed over. When he noticed one inconsistency, the other part here and there become questionable. Additionally, herscherik couldn't forget Minister Barret's last expression, the expression that completely looked down on people, just like the evil magistrate in the historical dramas, made herscherik's chest rise with discomfort. Was the first move taken? The last words whispered by Earl of Luxaria wouldn't leave his head. He picked up the pocket watch that fell off the bed. Whether it was from the recoil of drop, the lip of the clock was open and he looked at it. Herschrik's eye grew wide. What was there wasn't the clock face that he had seen before, but a small portrait fitted inside. It appears this clock watch had to be a two-folded structure. A structure where if you slightly press the open and close button, it will be the clock face. And if you open it after pressing the button twice to close it, the portrait will appear. The portrait had a young, healthy Earl of Zaria, a woman who is probably the Earl's wife, and a baby held in her arm. The three of them, as family, were smiling happily. The Earl will probably get healthy. The Earl will probably get a death penalty. He recalled the aristocrat's conversation on his way back on his road. Is he in jail right now? It would be nice if he had been obedient. Herscherik closed the pocket watch and returned to the table. He then went to the bed and put out the futon over himself. I probably cannot meet the Earl right now. He easily came to the prediction that investigation is surely underway right and around now. Tomorrow, I'm going to wake up early and go meet him. The reason being is that he felt like he must meet him. Herscherik wasn't sleepy and he still closes his eyes. It was 2 quick years since he reincarnated in this world. Herscherik has come to live a life of royalty, something unthinkable in his past life. He is fed without saying anything. All his clothes are custom made with the highest grade. Even though he lost his mother, his wet nurse, Maria was still kind to him. His father is the king, as well as kind, handsome young man. Compared to his life before he reincarnated this world, its unthinkable dreamlike world without inconvenience. Almost like he had hit a jackpot in a lottery. However, this world surrounded him may not be that sweet of dream after all. Thinking back, there were many unnatural occurrences, but he had turned a blind eye to them. He felt like if he didn't look at them straight in the eye, then he would have given up and forgotten everything in his past life. And he may no longer want to admit the reality of Ryoko's death and her family, whom she would never see again, and drown in the indulgent life of aristocrats in this world. The righteous heart that tells him that he mustn't forget, the fearful heart that wants him to look away from reality clash inside of herscherik. At 4 a.m., herscherik got up from his bed in the middle of his dim room and finished changing clothes as quickly as he could. It was still the beginning of spring and cold, so he put on a coat. After he'd opened the door and poked his head out the door, he checked that no one was outside and ran out to the hallway. I'm glad that I got Marla to show me the sketch of the castle. He always did his normal walk with Marla. Although he wasn't allowed to leave the inner palace nor a garden for any reason, Marla thoroughly taught him which path to take to get where. Roughly speaking, the castle is composed of the king's residence, the inner palace to the north, the imperial castle that acts as governmental facility to the south, the research institution to the east, and the military facility to the soldier and the knights to the west. And specifically speaking, the little details are different, but to herscherik, who doesn't get out, as long as he knew the path to his destination, the western castle with the prison, that was enough. He left the empty hallway and then entered the courtyard. The courtyard is a place where those live in inner palace could enter. During the daytime, the prince's escorts would gaze at the flower and chatter and would cause the flowers to bloom. But right now, there's no daylight. There's not a single person in the courtyard. He left the passageway, and next to the garden, he passed through the gate and faced the imperial castle and turned towards the west. He head west in that direction and saw his destination into view. herscherik barely managed to reach his destination while avoiding eyes of soldier night shift patrol. When he left the passageway that connected the imperial castle to the military facility, the training ground to the right of him is right in front of him. During daytime, this place would be filled with soldiers and knights. However, the military facility stood towering among surrounding empty training grounds. This is the first time he had been outside of the inner palace. Normally, herscherik would have falling around, and he didn't have the luxury to do so until now. The prison is a little further to the west. He recalled the sketch from inside his memory and began walking. He went past the soldier in the middle of the patrol several times and reached the backside of the military facility. Probably due to the lack of maintenance, the surrounding garden between the castle walls and facility was overgrown with weeds, and the grass was free to grow as tall as it could. It was lucky for him that a child's body could easily be hidden just by bending down. On the wall of the building, there was a window that could be close to the door and had bars covering it. There was no glass inserted in the space, and only bars were attached to it. The small windows that made have made of many to prevent one's escaping acts of substitute light source for prisoners below for basement. I hope the Earl is in here. He gripped a beautiful old silver pocket watch as a good luck charm and approached the bars. Luxaria, are you there? He called out in a small voice so he wouldn't be caught. But there was no answer. He continued to do that towards each window, and even so there was no response. The next one is the last one. Earl, if you're in there, please answer. If I don't see him there, there's a possibility of meeting him will be lost. Herscherik prayed that he put some strength as he holds the pocket watch. Who's there? Without a doubt, that is the voice I've heard in the banquet hall. The voice belonged to the man with light blonde hair. Chapter 3. Pocket Watch, Earl, and Puppet 2. On the other side of the iron bars, herscherik was about to raise his voice in delight when he heard the answer from Jill, but he covered his mouth in panic, as if he raised his voice, and he would be noticed by the surrounding soldiers. Then all his work until now would have been for naught. Herscherik bent forward, carefully drew closer to the barred window, and peered inside. When he did, there was the Earl of Luxaria inside the prison, with coat removed. The Earl looked up to the window where herscherik peered down to see the inside. Their gaze met. As the Earl wasn't expecting anyone to appear, he opened his eyes wide and stood still. Herscherik observed the frozen Earl of Luxaria's condition. Numerous places of his clothes were covered in dirty spots and conspicuous tears. The first thing that caught Herscherik's attention was the injury on Earl's forehead. Most likely came from where he was arrested. He probably didn't receive any treatment in the prison, so there were traces of blood running down. Is the injury on your forehead alright? The first thing that was on his mind escaped from Herscherik's mouth. There's no way he's alright. He's reconsidering and immediately regretted it. This person who held the rank of Earl suffered violent treatment and ended up in this place. The Earl was still in shock, so Herscherik extended his hand and presented the pocket watch. His initial purpose for coming here to return it to the Earl. I came here to return this to you. It's important to you, right? Yes, it's very important. I'm glad I could deliver this to you. The Earl of Luxaria accepted the pocket watch from Herscherik. He closed his eyes in nostalgia look and struck the pocket watch. Then he gripped it tightly, closed his eyes, and made a painful expression, like he was holding back bitterness. The moment Herscherik sensed trouble in his expression and was about to ask about it, the Earl returned his gaze on the prince. The Earl's gaze was so straightforward that the question couldn't leave Herscherik's mind throat. Earl kneeled down on one knee and lowered his head towards the prince. When Herscherik later learned that it was a sign of respect at his retainer, His Highness Herscherik, I apologize for spoiling your long-awaited banquet last night. The Herscherik shook his head as the Earl of Luxaria words. Don't worry, it's fine. More importantly, Earl, please tell me more about yourself. About me? The Earl The Earl rose up from his humble position and casually repeated the prince's words. His voice had astonishment mixed in. I am a traitor who tried to deceive the minister and was arrested instead. My being here is the unquestionable proof of that fact. The Earl of Zuria's words were mixed with scorn, in no way directed towards herscherik, but towards himself. Herscherik sensed emotions containing his tone and opened his mouth, thinking that it can't go on like this. Earl of Luxuria, I didn't want to know the facts swirling around the air, but your truth. Herscherik stared straight at him and continued to speak without averting his eyes. I came out this far because I want to hear Earl's story from Earl's mouth, not the words of other people. No matter what others say, I want to hear what you have to say. There is only one fact, because that is the reality of what have happened. When one's truth is fulfilled, people react, feel, and think about the truth through their own thoughts and perspective. But there are as many truths as there's to people. Herscherik didn't want to become like those people who are easily arbitrarily decide that if people say it's a fact, then it is a fact. Herscherik continued to speak without averting his gaze. He was only a child who had just yesterday celebrated his third birthday. He had a mature tone, and his unclouded eyes were fixed on the Earl as he gulped. Within the past years, I wonder if there are people who would speak like this to me. The answer was no. He was never spoken like a prince by anyone during his time of this world. Even if he was spoken like that, the words will only be interpreted as nothing but excessive gossip or judgmental feelings. However, this prince's word was like water as they sipped through the dried out man's heart. As Herscherik kept pressuring, the Earl of Luxuria began to tell his tale. I was caught in a trap. He paused for several beats before continuing his story to the grave tone. The beginning of 3 years ago, he noticed a noble corruption. He learned that noble, a viscount, took part of a legal fraud. He reported to the Bureau of Legal Affairs. Normally, the corruption would warrant of revocation of his title, but the viscount just got away with a stern warning. Additionally, the Earl felt doubtful, and with his sense of justice, he began to investigate by himself the events related to his corruption. In the end, he discovered that Minister Burbazed and his fraction were behind the corruption, and the minister was doing it for his own gains. I thought at this rate, this country would decline and be destroyed. In order for the nobles to line their pockets, they acted as dictators and raised taxes. Citizens who couldn't pay their taxes were worried about their necessaries to live and wander on the street. Life had become difficult for them, so they turned to a life of crime, causing public order to deteriorate. Taxes began to rise again to control them. It was clear that the cycle of negatives would cause this country to decay. It was right around the time when I was planning to recruit like-minded comrades to return to the government to the status quo. My wife and child died in an incident. My son was only 3 years old, like your highness. While he was in the middle of his heartbroken, thinking that it was an accident, but a secret letter delivered to him, a contents, a warning, telling him not to pray any more further. There is no proof, but they're the one who stole the life of my wife and a child by covering it as an accident to set it as an example to me, those who share my concern for the country. After all, my comrades were struck by bad luck one by one, and our group fell apart. Despite that, Earl Manzaria didn't give up. The hatred that he had for his loving family was stolen from him, driven onwards. In consequence, the Earl thought that without those feelings, he wouldn't have lived this far and gripped the pocket watch tightly. That is why I decided to fight despite being alone. I gathered as much evidence as I could within these 3 years and reported them to His Majesty. However, the results is what played out yesterday. The secret letter that he knew nothing about, along with the imperial seal that was probably forged, wanted the search of the document that could be easily imitate the author's handwriting, and created a forged secret letter in a blink of eye. That, or it could also be the evidence that I was holding, was a bait to lure him out. As a result of surrendering himself to anger, he was caught in the trap as planned. This country was a powerful country in the continent for many years. It has vast lands and military strength and connections between royal family and the foreign countries that brought about perpetual peace. That was currently protecting the Grace's kingdom was the continued 500 years of history, its vast territory, the relations of fellow royalty, and its military strength. All those managed to protect it from foreign country. However, that was only on the surface. The long-lasting peace was slowly beginning to decay from the inside. Furthermore, the great number of countries that has begun gaining power appeared. It would have been the word of turmoil and internal affairs of Grace's kingdom, a country whose name was known throughout the whole continent as the Great Power, was ever be leaked to other countries. Then it would create an opening for them to take advantage of the kingdom state. It was before your Highness was born, before the time that His Majesty was born, and when he took the throne, a most violent time when royalty and nobles opposed each other. At the time, Earl Bilzaria was still young, and he uncovered these facts by connecting the information he gathered like a puzzle. According to herscherik, the king who reigned during his grandfather's time was a man with keen eyes. He kept a watchful eye on aristocrat corruptions, yet he was unable to strip them of their rank and dismiss them as if they cleverly hide the evidence proof of their corruption. It was at that moment misfortune fell upon this country. Members of the royalty family, one by one, were falling all over the place due to sickness. Now that he thought back to it, was it really because of disease? The keen-eyed king passed away due to sickness, and the first and the second prince followed. The only one left was the third prince, who had no influential backing. He was only 10-year-old. Barbaeus became his only guardian and was bestowed the position of regent. A regent. A ring. A regent. By the time the young king became adult, Barbaeus has returned to the position of ministered. The faction that opposed the ministered and royal family faction, influential aristocrats, all practically purged. Okay, let me read that sentence again. By the time the young king became adult and Barbaeus was returned to the position of ministered, the faction that opposed the ministered and the royal family faction of influential aristocrats all practically purged. All those left alive had their influence significantly lessened, and those that could no longer oppose the ministered. And before anybody realized it, the minister's faction seized control of the government. I was still young and had no interest in the country's government. I was only the son of a regional lord. So by the time I realized it was too late. Your Highness, I apologized. The Earl of Lazaria concluded and bowed his head. He was knocked down by a sense of helplessness and looked like he was disappear at any moment. Herscherik saw him quite small despite being adult. Everything was stolen, and I hope he has turned out to be fake. The Earl of Lazaria have nothing left for him. I'm sorry. The words spilled out of Herscherik like apology. Earl of Lazaria didn't expect such words, so he looked up and saw Herscherik, whose eyes were welling up in tears as he tried to hold them back from crying. I'm sorry for not knowing anything. I didn't notice anything, even though you worked so hard for us. I'm sorry. Herschirik's word and sentence were connected as he tried to hold back his tears. And despite of losing everything, he was still fighting all by himself. He lost his family, parted with his comrades, and even though he was alone, the Earl fought. Ryoko was also part of her family. As she remembered his past life to family, he wanted to cry. He wondered how his father, mother, and sister were doing in Japan. His own sentiment, on top of his empathy towards Earl Lazaria, caused Herschirik's brimming eyes to overflow. I miss Japan. I want to go back home. Herscherik pushed down those feelings in the depths of his heart and preserved himself, but the seal broken and they spilled out. I'd always deceive my own feelings, even if he unconsciously. This was the only way for him to lessen the pain that he preserved by himself. But it was different for Earl Lazaria, for he accepted before confronting everything. Herscherik believed that this was his reality. Will you believe me? I may be spewing convenience fact to you, deceiving you. People who try to deceive people wouldn't ever confess such things themselves. Herscherik declared to the Earl and stood up. I will speak with father and release you immediately. If you have any other pieces of evidence, they should be able to stop the minister's conspiracy right away. Please wait. Herscherik said he started running without waiting for a reply. I can't lose him. To death penalty. the death penalty. Herscherik returned to the path and made sure that he wouldn't be caught by anyone. As soon as he saw who those working castle would be waking up, there were several dangerous encounters, but Herscherik managed to finally arrive at the inner palace. He headed towards his father's private room. He had heard of his room from his father, but this would be the first time he ever visited. He thought that there might be a chance that someone was in the room, but the light shone through the gap in the room was the king's private room, despite how early it was. Herscherik didn't knock on the door and opened it without any hesitation. Father! Herscherik? His father was sitting by himself on a sofa in front of the fireplace. The fire in the fireplace had already burned out. There was a nearby light that gave off a warm light. This early in the morning? What's wrong? Are you no good in the morning? And those clothes? Herscherik checked his own appearance. His coat, pants, clothes were all covered in dirt, and several leaves were stuck on him. One could easily see right away that he went out to summer. However, Herscherik drew closer without caring that and put his father's clothes in his tiny dirty hands. Father, please listen! Herschrik's angry look did not belong to a 3-year-old. He would usually pretend to be a 3-year-old child, but he couldn't afford to keep up that fracas now, since someone's life depends on it. No, perhaps there were even more people's lives at stake. Think about it. Herscherik didn't care. Thinking about it, Herscherik didn't care about keeping up this act that he was 3-year-old. The Earl of Zaria isn't a traitor. He isn't back. He isn't bad. He was deceived. He was deceived. He was crying in the end, to the point where he couldn't understand himself and what he was saying. He tried his best, his hardest to look upward to his father, but tears overflowed and blurred his vision, making it very hard to see his father's beautiful face. Feelings such as regret, longing, and sadness, they're all swelling up inside him. The waves of numerous feelings, for the first time since reincarnated, surged forth like a tidal wave, and tears burst forth. Death penalty, as such, is not good. Unless he speak in a more logical order, he wouldn't be understood. He realized this, but all that came out of his mouth was simple words. He managed not to break down crying by grabbing his father's cloak. However, he was supposed to be looking up before he realized that his gaze was on a carpet. Herscherik. The father gently shook the son's head, picked him up, and stood up. He always held his son, but the child who always felt somewhat heavy today, rather than it was his weight. The king thought that it was his presence that was increased. And then he suddenly called his butler, who was awaiting his orders. I will be going outside. I'll be back before breakfast. As you wished. The king nodded for a short reply and turned his face towards Herscherik. The youngest prince showed an emotion that could have done so far. The white cheeks, as well as his eyes, were swollen and red. Want to go for a little walk with your dad? Okay, that was a bit challenging today. Oh, okay. I guess I finished reading a little earlier than usual. I guess we're just gonna end it here. Chapter 4. I will find some other time to read it. Today, I don't think my voice is up. I don't think my pronunciation and my comprehension level is up right now. So, So, yeah, we're gonna see you tomorrow. Not tomorrow. just when I have the time to, when I find the time to read it again. And tomorrow is a holiday, so I hope everybody get a break. Alright, good night.